hold hands and close your eyes. It's midnight, and you're listening to the Ghost Story Guys. Welcome to the Ghost Story Guys. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Brennan Storr.
And this is a show where we talk about spooks, specters, and all the other things watching us from the shadows beyond the campfire. Some conversations only make sense after the sun has set, and this is most definitely one. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode number 190. And we're coming to you from that tiny mountain cabin you dream about, but can never quite reach. Paul, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm doing marvelously well, thank you. How are you?
I am good. I actually got to have a new experience the other day. This was wholly new, and it also was very embarrassing. And I debated whether or not I would share this story on the show, but I'm going to share it because I cannot help myself. Before I do that, though, I want to say I'm really looking forward to this episode. We're doing something really different on this show. We're doing an entirely UFO-themed episode. So these are stories of strange encounters with UFOs, mostly lights in the sky. We don't really have any contact stuff in this episode. That might be something down the road. Although there was a weird little side story I found that does have some contact elements to it. But it all just kind of seemed like, you know, the text I got from my friend as we were wrapping up the last Talk Spooky, some conversations you and I have had, and then I was listening to your interview with Preston Dennett over on Mysteries and Monsters, and I thought, you know, I think this is worth exploring, and not only because the stories are so interesting, but because you know so much, and there are so many unusual encounters out there that I know you're familiar with, that I really wanted to pick your brain. But before we get there, again, my story is not UFO-centric, but it does deal with the sky. So, having lived in Victoria for the last 17 years, we don't really get thunderstorms. It's just a quirk of the geography. They don't really happen that often, maybe once every couple of years. Here in Southern Ontario, they happen quite a bit. And what I've learned is because my apartment is on the southwest corner of a building, a lot of the rain kind of seems to come from the west. So I have to close my actually I have to close all my windows because the wind and rain comes in so furiously. Because I'm kind of a corridor too. I'm at the intersection of two very long, very wide streets. So there's very much a wind corridor. So I have to close the windows because otherwise everything is getting rained on. So yesterday I was working down at the atrium, the co-working space that I belong to in St. Thomas, and I was working on some writing for the other show I'm doing with Brandon. And all of a sudden, my phone goes, and it was a thunderstorm warning, a severe thunderstorm warning. And I thought, oh, that's cool. Well, I guess that'll be fun. Sweet. And then a friend of mine called and said, man, did you see the thunderstorm warning? I said, oh yeah, it's crazy. And they sent me some pictures from where they work, and the sky was apocalyptic. It was gorgeous. They asked where I was. I told them, and they said, hey, did you leave your windows open? And I realized that I had, because it is getting increasingly warm here, and I do not currently have the budget for an air conditioner, so I just leave the windows open because I can take advantage of this wind tunnel I described. However, I had left them open before I left.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. So I grabbed my shit as fast as I could, piled into the car, and I've never tried to beat a storm before. And I'm going to tell you something about things that travel in the sky, Paul. They travel faster than my tiny Mitsubishi hatchback.
Yes, they do.
So I squealed onto Hamilton Road, which is not far from where I live. I squeal onto the road off the highway, and it hits. And it's just waves of rain lashing down from the west. So I know exactly what's happening in my apartment. So I book it for my place, park, run upstairs. Sure enough, the kitchen floor is soaked. So I close the window and okay, shit, all right. Go to the bedroom. The bed is wet.
Oh, no.
The bed is like 2 feet away from the window, but it's come so far through the window, it's rained on my bed. So I thought, shit. So I closed the windows, mopped everything up, and I realized the bed is so wet, I have to stand that and the box spring up to let them dry out. And as I do this, I realize I've been sleeping on the wrong side of my mattress.
It was a sign.
It was a Costco mattress. I had it delivered. The guys brought it upstairs. I walked in, they set it up, and I went, well, that's weird. I've never seen a mattress that looks like that, but okay. And so I just put the fitted sheet down, and I like a firm mattress, so I just didn't think about it. And then when I was taking them apart, I thought, hang on, why is the logo on this thing upside? Oh, Jesus, there's a quilted side.
The god of orthopedics intervened.
This is why your back hurts, you idiot. You idiot.
Thor's really into realigning bones, and therefore he thought you'd suffered enough, Brennan.
Well, what a guy. Because I tell you, it's a lot softer on the other side.
It's a lot smoother. It's a lot nicer sleeping.
It really was, actually. I had a great night's sleep. So yeah, so that was how Thor conspired to help me realize that sometimes I can be kind of an idiot. Didn't even occur to me they would have left the mattress there upside down. I just didn't think about it. I'm like, oh, well, I was tired. They brought it. I've been sleeping on an air mattress for 2 weeks at that point. I don't give a shit, whatever. Fitted sheet, done. And I just thought, well, I guess I bought a cheap shit Costco mattress. It's not going to be that comfortable. And not that it was uncomfortable, but
Firm.
It was firm. It was firm.
Perhaps they were just jealous. They may sleep on a futon, and I thought, yeah, fuck this guy.
I mean, I did make them lug a mattress and box spring up 4 flights of stairs. So I get it.
I had a strange animal encounter the other night.
Oh, do tell.
I was on my balcony, taking in some of the late night air and seeing how many drunk people would be staggering past. I'm quite far away. It's not like I'm ready to pounce on them like some kind of ninja.
That hadn't occurred to me, but I love that image now.
And so as I'm stood there, we've around here, we've got this beautiful family of owls. And so occasionally you can hear them hooting around. And I've seen them on a few late night walks me and Theo have had, just sat on an aerial or a chimney hooting away to themselves. And so I'm stood there just having a look round, and then out the corner of my eye I saw this shape coming across, flying through the sky. And I thought, it's a bird doing flying. Birds don't fly at night normally. And then as it came, it literally was about 10 foot above me under this tree, and it kind of just went, never made a sound. It just kind of twisted and turned and dove a bit and then rose a bit. And then I went, bloody hell, it's an owl. And it had just gone,
oh, wow.
And landed on the next house's television aerial and just sat there staring at me for 15, 20 seconds. And then it just went, whoop, and flew off.
Just saying hi.
And then about 20 minutes later, when I was shutting the curtains, I shit myself because I'm thinking, why is there a cat? Reflection, there's no cat behind me. Is it a ghost? And then I realised there's a cat sat on the wall staring at me like that. I'm thinking, what's he doing? What's happening here?
They knew we had a UFO episode coming, Paul. They were trying to send you a message.
Cats,
they wanted
owls,
to talk.
They do.
Yep.
If anybody turns up trying to make me pancakes, we are in trouble. Man, Julie made some pancakes the other day.
Oh, there you go. It's all coming.
But they came from Lidl, not outer space.
We don't know where Lidl got them, in fairness.
That's true. I've seen some of the things they sell in the middle aisle.
Well, we are not here to talk about killer owls or crazy weather, although I suppose both those things actually tie into the topic. But we are here to talk about strange stories of UFO encounters. But before we do that, we got to thank our patrons.
This one's for the patrons.
Patrons, Apple Podcast, and YouTube subscribers, we could not do what we do without you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. For real, guys, every single person who downloads the Ghost Story Guys, you help make us who we are. But people who subscribe to us on Patreon, Apple Podcasts, and now YouTube are the ones who allow the show to continue. Without you, we couldn't do it. We couldn't pay the bills. It just would not happen. So thank you very, very much. And while we'd like to thank all our patrons, Apple Podcast, and YouTube subscribers, we would especially like to thank our latest ones. They are
Danimal Fantastic,
Alison Barnes,
Morg Frog,
Roberts,
Rita Johnston,
James,
Johnny Pierce,
Kate,
Alison.
Again, thank you so much for supporting what we do here. We really could not do it without you. And if you would like to help support the Ghost Story Guys, help us pay the bills, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. We have an awesome community of people over there. You are missing out if you're not part of it. We're also open for subscriptions again, as we mentioned, on YouTube. The pricing is the same as over on Patreon. And while we'll wait till the end of the show to tell you about all the cool stuff you get, we will say you get an ad-free feed. And who doesn't want that? Ads suck. And if you don't want the community, you just want the stuff, there's Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to Ghost Story Guys Premium. Again, that's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, or sign up to Ghost Story Guys Premium via Apple Podcasts or YouTube. One last thing, shout out to our composer, Rainy Days for Ghosts. Rainy Days for Ghosts is a project of film journalist and composer Harper Smith. You can find more of Harper's work by going to rainydaysforghosts.bandcamp.com or by searching for Rainy Days for Ghosts or Street Witch on streaming platforms everywhere. All right, we are going to take a quick break and be right back with stories of a little cosmic terror. Germany, 2013. This encounter happened on July 25th, 2013 in Germany, right at the French border. It was 10:30 p.m. when my ex and I went outside to have a cigarette. While we were talking, I noticed 3 oddly bright stars in the corner of my eye. I looked over my shoulder, and in that moment, those stars quickly descended. Boom. There it was, a pitch black triangular craft hovering completely silent about 30 feet above our heads, seeming to look at us belly first. Each side was approximately 30 feet long. Its lights were bright, yet not blinding. I would describe them as pure lights. I've never seen anything like it before. We were absolutely gobsmacked, like deer caught in the headlights. We felt paralyzed, as if we were hypnotized or controlled, just frozen and staring in disbelief. Everything was or seemed silent in that moment. Before, you could hear frogs and crickets. They were actually quite noisy, but it was as if time had stopped. Oddly enough, neither of us can say if that encounter lasted 5 seconds, 30 seconds, or 3 minutes. Before it took off, it moved super fast from the left, upwards and to the right. It was zigzagging like a ping pong ball. It was totally surreal. I did not understand what was happening. Then it shot off towards space in an instant. It was so fast. It left trails of light behind, like in that Star Wars scene where they hit warp or light speed. And during all of this, it didn't make the slightest noise. Nothing. We immediately turned our heads toward each other and confirmed that we really just saw what we saw. We looked up again, then at each other again, and without saying a word, we ran inside the house because fear and the flight instinct kicked in. However, my curiosity quickly took over, and I went outside once more, but the craft never returned. So yeah, that's my story. I didn't choose to have that sighting, but it happened. And Paul, I mean, obviously this is very much your wheelhouse. I'm going to be leaning on you a lot in this episode. I've really been looking forward to actually getting your perspective on this. I feel like this is really common, where it's like, I didn't ask for this. I didn't want this. Yeah. And it's kind of distressing.
It is, because it shakes everything you know about what you've been told about the world. And I think there is this perception that people who used to see UFOs and talk about it were all a bit frazzled and not altogether with it, and tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists who all lived in their mother's basement. And I think often it's the realization of when it happens to somebody that those cliches cannot apply to, that they find it so shattering that even after the event, or it might be something as nondescript as just watching some lights moving in a strange pattern and travelling at speeds that you can't explain, it just blows your mind because you've been told all your life that it doesn't happen. It's not real.
Yeah.
Until it does.
And you said something on the your interview with Preston Dennett that I found really interesting. It might have been Preston who said it. I can't remember, but you were talking about how in the 70s there was the real big UFO flap for a large portion of the 70s. 73 was particularly particularly eventful. But you mentioned that whenever UFOs were portrayed in media, it was almost always on silly shows. And the person who saw the sighting was almost always the boob or the buffoon.
Yep.
And I thought that was interesting. And it's something that, you know, again, you guys touched on this. And folks, I really encourage you to listen to that episode. Preston's an interesting guy. And Paul knows a lot about this stuff. But I thought it was interesting that you talked so much about disinformation. Because I think that is in order to kind of get your head around this subject, because I'll be honest, for a long time, even when I really got into the paranormal, I kind of thought, aliens, whatever, I'm not too worried about that. But some of the things you guys have talked about and things I've kind of learned through independent research, there is a surprising amount of state disinformation on this topic.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. And that's the thing that often makes people scratch their heads, because if it's all nonsense, why muddy the waters?
Yeah, you guys specifically mentioned a guy, was it Klaas?
Philip Klaas.
Philip Klaas. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
If I have to.
I believe it is integral to the story.
Yeah, Klaas set himself up sort of from the late 60s onwards until his death as the uber UFO skeptic, and would regularly appear on any show that would book him to talk disparagingly about people's experiences, witnesses, anything to do with the UFO subject, which, as far as he was concerned, had not one shred of evidence. He was a professional hoaxer and a disinformation agent. He was a calculated and manipulative liar, a bully, a misrepresenter of information, and a thoroughly nasty piece of work, in my opinion. Some people that have met him over the years have said that he's quite a nice guy until he gets in front of the cameras. But then you only have to look at his FBI file, because there is an FBI file on Klaas, which was released, I think, in 2018, which you can look at. And even they didn't like him, because they said he was a very arrogant and conceited man who seemed to thrive on fame. I mean, he cast aspersions on near enough every major case. He accused Freddie Valentich, which is probably one of Australia's most famous incidents. He basically said outright that he was a drug runner. There is no evidence of that, ever. But that's what he said. He said, he disappeared because he was smuggling drugs. There's no evidence of that. But that was his thing. The Crash Landrum case. They were hysterically lying women who he also claimed that one of them must have been going through the menopause to have the flushes that she suffered afterwards. He also said that the doctor who examined them wasn't a real doctor. Well, he was. He was a doctor. It wasn't some bloke they met in a pub who said, "Can you pretend to be a doctor?" He was a proper doctor. Every major case, he would cast aspersions. I mean, he said Travis Walton was a drug addict and a fraudster. Every major case, he would cast aspersions on that person's character and just attack them viciously and horrifically, and constantly would send fake files to people. He constantly wrote to the FBI saying that they should not be involved in investigating any aspect of the paranormal. It was a disgraceful waste of taxpayers' money. All kinds of horrendous allegations about people. But he's one of them. When you look at his Wikipedia page, because he's classed as a god in the skeptic movement, there are aspects of that particular movement that is essentially a cult. When they're wrong about stuff, they don't admit it. They just remove all evidence of it.
Right. I know. Yeah, we've talked about that before. That is diabolical. I mean, it defeats the whole purpose of skepticism.
Well, absolutely. And they've got some very nasty opinions about people in the modern era. They're not very... I doubt that many of them will be enjoying Pride Month. I'll say that. Yeah.
Not all skeptics, to be clear. Again, I'm a subscriber to a number of skeptical podcasts, but there is definitely a very toxic element to that culture. Guys like Sargon of Akkad and people along those lines who are just garbage humans.
Yeah, and they are consistently re-editing anything to do with cryptozoology and paranormal on Wikipedia. Every article on there they change, alter, take information away. They are dogmatic in their approach. And I've said this before, and I've said this again. They are the same side as these people wondering about with ghost boxes and spirit radios and people claiming that somebody's dead aunt's telling them from beyond the grave that they need to stop having too much coffee, or that their dead father's coming through with a message about something that they need to tell. They are exactly the same thing to me, because if you can't be honest and try and deal with a situation methodically and scientifically and have to launch into personal attacks and character assassinations, or just outright belief against all forms of evidence contrary to it, then you're not being an investigator. You are in a cult that is never wrong, Everything you see is what you want it to be. And that's dangerous because you need skepticism, especially when you talk about the paranormal, because it is so manipulative. And it's the same in ufology, it's the same in cryptozoology. You have charlatans and liars and frauds who take advantage of vulnerable people who are grief-stricken, people who have had a shocking experience, people who just make the most outrageous nonsense up. But it sells, it's like these Muppets running around Britain claiming Bigfoot's here. I mean, just jump in the sea and do us all a favour, right? Because it's so frustrating, because when you want to look at it properly, and this is the same with any Fortean phenomena, neither of these two sides have any value, because they just will not come to a middle ground. It's either you're with me or you're against me, and that's all there is to it. And that's not good. I refuse to believe it. It's not good for anybody. And so Klaas is one of the worst examples of that, primarily because of the way he spoke about people. I mean, this is the other thing. When you've got things like Freddie Valentich, his entire family were grieving about the loss of a son, and you've got this knobhead in America saying, well, your son's dead because he was a drug smuggler.
Oof.
With no absolute empathy towards the fact that their son is dead. He's disappeared. There was never a shred of wreckage found. They put forward false explanations, which, when are disproved, they just ignore them. They don't talk about it. They think, oh, well, we'll move on to the next thing. We'll move on to the next thing. Next they'll be claiming bears can pick rocks up and throw them against buildings.
Okay, but that'd be pretty wild if they could, though, right?
Well, we're all in trouble if that's going on. We've got enough trouble with Bigfoot running about. Never mind bears wanging stuff. Sat there round your campfire toasting a few marshmallows. Next thing, somebody's head comes flying through the woods. No thanks. Northern California. Unknown. I was driving my van north up the 101 in California, through the redwoods on my way to Humboldt, through Mendocino. It was probably around 2 or 3 in the morning, and apart from a random car coming in the other direction every 15 minutes or so, I was totally alone. There aren't any buildings or towns for a huge chunk of this route, and aside from our headlights, it was pitch black. The road going through this part winds back and forth through some tight turns. As I was approaching one of them, I saw a bright light up ahead around the corner. It was much brighter than headlights and lit a huge area up, so I assumed it may have been those bright lights they put by rest stops along that road. As I turned around the sharp corner, the road straightened out in front of me, and I saw maybe 2 football fields in front of me, and about 100 feet up in the air, a perfectly white sphere that looked maybe 20 feet wide. Everything around me was strangely illuminated in this extremely bright, perfectly white light. The trees along either side of the road were visible as if in daylight. Long black shadows stretched along the ground behind the trees, all pointing towards this sphere of light in front of me. It was brighter and illuminated more of my surroundings than any one single light source I had ever seen in my life. But there was no glare to it, though. I was looking directly at it, but it didn't hurt my eyes in the slightest. It was just so white. It was almost like looking at a piece of paper. It was like someone had forgotten or randomly placed an omnidirectional light source in the environment, like some kind of early 3D rendering program, if that makes sense. I squinted my eyes at it to try and figure out what the hell I was looking at. Was I approaching some super bright light source along the road that just looked confusing for a second? Like just one of those tall LED pole things they have at rest stops. Was it a super bright meteor breaking up in the sky and just coming directly at me, instead of across the sky? I drove straight on for about 45 entire seconds, and the light was still there, and it was clearly only a few hundred feet in front of me, and only about 80 to 120 feet up in the air, just standing perfectly still. I was going about 55 miles an hour, and I slowly started slowing down after about 20 seconds after I first saw it, when I realised it was now right in front of me, and not something I was approaching or getting closer to, and got confused. I never seemed to get any closer to the nearby thing, nor further away from it as I changed speeds. It just seemed to match mine perfectly. After about 45 seconds, though, it suddenly shoots off over the horizon to my 2 o'clock. It just accelerated to some crazy speed instantly, and it took about a single second to disappear out of sight into the distance, leaving me once again in pitch darkness aside from my headlights. I wasn't feeling scared or excited really, just completely bewildered. I kept going north up the 101 for a few minutes, making twists and turns through the forest. And then, maybe 10 minutes later, it came back. I had reached a part of the road where it straightened back out again for a bit, and I saw the light come over the horizon and place itself in front of me in the air, the same distance as before. This time, though, my stomach kind of dropped, and I slowed way down to about 25 miles an hour. I hadn't seen another car in about 15 or 20 minutes, so I wasn't worried about getting rear-ended or anything. I just stared at this sphere as I crept forward along the road in my van. I'd rolled down my windows after the first time I saw it to get some air, and I remember listening for propellers of a helicopter or a drone, but the only thing I could hear was my tyres slowly moving along the ground. Again, everything around me was lit up in the unnaturally white light in such a large area. I drove slowly at it for about an entire minute, and then it suddenly shot off again, almost directly over me to my 5 or 6 o'clock. Once again, it accelerated in a super strange way, like someone grabbing the movement slider on a 3D object in a blender and just swinging your mouse as fast as you can to get it to move in a straight line, if that makes any sense. I pulled over, got out of my car, and just kind of stared in the direction that it had gone, not sure what to do or think. I stood there for about a minute, holding onto the door, waiting for something to happen before I got back in my van and started driving north again. I was confused as hell and just kept trying to rationalize what had happened for maybe 5 minutes. And then it came back. Once again, I came to a point of the road where ahead of me it straightened out, and then from my 3 o'clock it zipped back in front of me. Once again, it was illuminating everything around me, and it was clearly some 15 to 25 foot wide, perfect sphere, once again about 80 feet up in the air, perfectly stationary, and always at the same distance, never jiggling or waving, never seemingly getting a single foot closer or further away. At this point, I started to feel angry in a way. I let out some expletives and tried accelerating at it for a few seconds, but I didn't get any closer to it. Not that I really wanted to get any closer to the thing necessarily. I just had no clue what else to do but to drive faster down the road, I guess. The sphere hung eerily above me, forever out of reach, for only about a total of 15 seconds this time, before once again silently shooting over the horizon to my 10 o'clock. And that was the last time I saw it.
Interesting stuff. One quick note. I didn't want to interrupt your flow, but they referred to Blender. They're actually referring to the software program Blender for the 3D modeling program.
Good, I was going to say, that's some crazy, I don't know, crazy shit they were talking about. What are they on about?
Yeah. No, it's a 3D design program. I tried to teach myself once, and I was designing a rocket ship. When I realized I had to individually build each shape, I thought, no, fuck this is stupid. And I just gave up.
Where's me CAD?
Yeah. Oh, no, I have people who do this. Like, the people who actually want to do this, I'll let them do it.
Good for them.
But this is really similar to a story that I've talked about a number of times in this show that's not in Strange, but I collected it from a guy while doing the research for that. And I'm going to make available to subscribers. I still have the audio file from like 2012 where I talked to this guy. So I'm going to make that available to subscribers. I'll edit a down version of that guy's testimony. But I'm really kind of curious, Paul, because we were talking after the last story about character assassination and guys who, skeptics who really kind of just go for the throat for anyone who talks about this stuff, and they really try to discredit them. And there was something you guys talked about on that same episode of Mysteries and Monsters, where one of the people who saw a UFO and was roundly dismissed for it was the guy who discovered Pluto, Clyde Tombaugh. How the fuck do you dismiss the testimony of a guy who discovered one of the planets in the goddamn sky when he's talking about things in the sky?
He doesn't know what he's looking at, does he? Obviously.
That's madness. To to hand wave that whole thing away. His job is up. How do you ignore a guy who then says he saw something that was up?
Because it doesn't fit the agenda. You know, if you're going to trust the opinion of anyone, this is the thing they have to say, well, is he a credible witness? Well, I think if you've discovered what was classed as a planet and will always cause astronomers to fall out, Pluto, because it's no longer classed as a planet, though they're trying to bring it back again. They're up and down with Pluto.
Bring Pluto back. I'm Team Pluto.
So, essentially, if you believe that... Because why did they believe he discovered a planet? Well, they believed he discovered a planet because it was before the UFO wave. Because I think Pluto was discovered in the 30s, late 20s, early 30s. Like I say, it's less than 100 years ago since we found Pluto.
Right.
Which is mind-blowing, once again. But 20 years later, for him to be just dismissed from seeing something, and he's not the only astronomer, you know, these are specialised people whose job is to study the night sky and make discoveries. And there's, you know, we're not talking one or two of them, there's dozens. And obviously it's got to the point these days, very similar to military personnel, pilots, even members of the general public, where if you said anything like this, you'd be like, people would go, what's he on? Oh, he's drunk, he's on drugs. Must be stressed. He's hallucinating. It was the planet Venus. They don't know what they're looking at. People are stupid. They're all confused. It's generally anything that will disappear. You know, I mean, me and Preston once talked about a story about a woman who was so terrified about an object that was hovering above her head, she wet herself in front of witnesses. And the official report said she'd misidentified Venus. And that's in Project Blue Book.
So other people also saw this.
Oh yeah, it was a multiple witness account that saw this object moving around for quite a while. It's in the 50s, 1954, I think that one was.
I got to tell you, Paul, I've spent a lot of time looking in the night sky, and nothing I've seen up there has made me fill my pants.
No.
I feel like that's something's, unless, you know, you've been holding it a real long time, you saw something that would produce that response. I always thought, again, because I don't know a lot about this shit, but I always thought that the government program to sort of catalog these things, Blue Book, was very much like a truth-seeking kind of endeavor.
But it wasn't. It was their version of the truth.
This is where it gets really interesting, and this is where I think a lot of people kind of run into the issue with UFO shit, because you have to contend with government influence, with social influence, right? I mean, ghost shit. If we live after we die, no one in officialdom really cares. There are obviously religious leaders who would be upset one way or the other to find out that, no, okay, the way the system of belief that you have instituted is actually bears no resemblance to what comes after the point of physical death. But there are so many geopolitical implications of life outside this planet that it's just impossible to ignore. And it's really kind of muddy water. And I think that's one of the reasons I've avoided this topic on the show for so long, because obviously we don't like to talk politics here. But there is, at least to a certain degree at least, it's hard to tease the two apart.
Well, it is, but it's not one political side either. It's all political sides of all parties in mostly the US and the UK, Canada and Australia. Whereas you have other countries like Belgium and China and Japan and Chile and Argentina, where they are very open and say, yeah, there's weird things going on here and we've no idea what it is. But it's not swamp gas.
You know, you mentioned a guy, again, on that same episode, a guy named James McDonald.
Yeah, bless him.
He was a UFO witness?
He was an astrophysicist. He was a doctor of physics. You know, and this was not a stupid man.
Right.
He was a teacher at University of Arizona, I think it was. And he was a very clever man. And his theory was he believed that there was some reality to this and simply wanted an open and thorough investigation dealing with the facts. And therefore, he considered that, in his opinion, the extraterrestrial hypothesis was a good explanation for what was going on in some incidences. And he was such a well-regarded man. He spoke at the United Nations, so he wasn't just any old physicist. This was a man who had a real reputation. He was an excellent public speaker. He was incredibly intelligent, articulate, passionate. And he was humiliated. I can't remember if it was in a congressional hearing or something else, but a senator basically said, you don't want to listen to anything he says. He believes in aliens. He wears tin foil. And it basically started a campaign against him that drove him, well, some people say drove him to suicide, because he was found dead in the desert with an alleged self-inflicted gunshot wound and a suicide note. And that was in 1971.
Southwestern USA, 2015. In 2015, I was in the desert camping. It was about 2 a.m. and I was still in the truck cab eating pistachios and tossing the shells out of the open window. There was a huge full moon in the sky behind me, and I was watching it in the rearview mirror. It was so bright I could have read by its light. All at once, a tall being walked out about 6 feet behind my truck and stopped. I turned around to look at it out my open back window. It was about 8 feet tall, skinny, long arms with elbows below its waist area, foot-long skinny neck, oval head that had what looked like a 4-foot beard or tube hanging from its lower face. I couldn't make out the feet or hands. It was walking like it was struggling, like if you walk in a swimming pool with the resistance of the water. As it stopped, it barely moved its shoulders, but that freakish long neck turned the big head at me. I don't know if it saw me in the truck. I froze. It then turned its head forward and continued on walking. It was bizarrely thin, like an insect. I took off after it passed by my truck, camping equipment flying out the back as I sped away. I went back about 4 months later in the daylight. I found what was left of the pile of pistachio shells, so I knew the exact spot where I was, but saw nothing unusual. It was a nice day, so I drove around a bit and found a place that looked like a good hiking spot. As I got out of the truck, maybe about 3 in the afternoon, I heard diesel engines struggling, digging, like backhoes, earth movers, dump trucks dumping a load and banging the scooper to unload all the dirt. Trucks backing up with a beep, beep, beep sound, but there was nothing around. I was in the middle of nowhere on a dirt road, no other cars around for miles. I couldn't figure out where the digging noise was coming from, but wondered. I got on my hands and knees and listened to the ground. It was coming from under the desert landscape. I was standing right where the digging sounds were coming from. As I stood up, I saw 2 very shiny white pickup trucks facing the front of my truck, their windows blacked out. They were so shiny the sun reflecting on them hurt my eyes. Any truck driving in the desert should be covered with a ton of dust, but these looked like they just came out of a showroom. I was scared. As I got back in my truck, I saw 2 more white trucks exactly the same behind me, facing me. I drove off. As I got to the nearest road, my heart sank as there were 2 more of the same trucks waiting for me at the intersection, facing each way, so whichever way I was going, one would be right behind me. As I got on the road, the truck behind me followed me, right on my bumper. I was going 90 miles an hour and the truck was right there with me. Then a second came up trying to pass me. I was swerving across 2 lanes to keep it from happening, then came up to an exit. At the same time, the 2 trucks slowed down and made a U-turn and went back. I continued to note how shiny the 2 trucks were. So shiny, in fact, that my eyes were hurting from the reflection. They could have taken me out in the desert and no one would have found me or my truck, but they didn't. Did they want to kill me on the road? I don't know. I do know I was terrified to go home thinking they'd be there waiting. But I never saw them again and never went back. And I gotta be honest with you, Paul, this one just sounds like someone having an anxiety attack. I mean, I'll say, like, the humanoid encounter thing sounds terrifying. And I know, like, we've done a few kind of humanoid encounters on this show before. I remember there's one from Los Angeles back, like way, way back, that stuck out at me. So I'm willing to entertain the notion of a weird lanky figure kind of appearing out of nowhere. But I don't know. I'm just imagining two guys in perfectly normal trucks, and this lunatic is just swerving across the road because he thinks he's in the French Connection.
Well, I think once again, if something normal happens after you've just had an extraordinary experience, everything becomes extraordinary.
You know, we've talked about this a lot, where if you have an extraordinary experience in a place, quite often that doesn't mean the place is special. It just means that you had a unique experience there. You know, that's why, like, people who keep going back to places like Point Pleasant, they don't really have much happen because it's sort of a transitory phenomenon. So this guy going back there 4 months later, I'm even a little doubtful that would a stack of pistachios still be there? I guess if you're in the desert, that maybe. I was thinking the forest, desert maybe. You know, going back 4 months later, I mean, you're going to be keyed up, because if you did see this thing, it's going to scare the absolute shit out of you. And then there's some poor jackass just out there mud bogging with his buddy, just managed to like hose his car off or something. And this guy thinks he's about to be murdered by the men in black.
Well, I mean, obviously the location kind of gives you an indication of where he might have been.
Are you thinking like Southern California?
Around that area, California, Arizona, Nevada. And we know there's lots of strange installations over there.
Well, I was thinking that. I mean, the digging could be, it could be a mine, you know, a distance, like it could be a long distance away. Could be military, could really be anything.
Could it be aliens?
Could also be. No, they've got a base in the Atlantic Ocean. That's what I read when I was researching this episode.
Yes, allegedly.
Yeah. Oh, so you're familiar with that particular?
Oh yes.
Of course you are. Why am I even saying that? That's what a stupid thing for me to say. Of course you know.
Where don't they have an underwater base?
I found this in a thread. I was cruising a bunch of different sites trying to find stuff, just like left to center shit to talk about on the show. And yeah, someone had screenshot. It was like 40 screenshots of a thread from somewhere on 4chan. I know, a very reliable source. What I love about this, and this is kind of what I love about the whole UFO phenomenon, is like, you could go on 4chan and tell everyone the truth, and it's not going to go anywhere. No one's going to believe you. Like what this guy wrote, he wrote that, you know, he's part of an unnamed government agency, or it's got a name, he wasn't willing to say what it was, that is aware of an extraterrestrial presence in the oceans. And the whole thing went out from there. And I mean, again, if he was spinning a story, which I assume he was, it was just conservative enough. It would take nothing to believe it, because again, he didn't say anything that was crazy. You know, whenever someone starts talking about the cabal, and I know Preston used that term a couple times on your show, and I thought, oh, you're not helping yourself here. But whenever someone drops something like the cabal, you start thinking, oh, okay. You know, if they start talking about like adrenochrome and any of that shit, you're like, all right, well, you're pulling stuff out of your ass. But this was just towed the line enough that I again, it would take nothing for me, or take very little for me to make that leap and go, okay, no, I buy this. I buy that there is, you know, aliens have been here and are just seem to be kind of trying to shepherd us in a certain direction and keep us from fucking anything up too badly, at least as far as nuclear arms go. But I said, I don't believe that, but this was close enough to what I could accept as reality that I could entertain the notion. And again, I think that's what's fascinating about this topic, because there are so many variables and there are so many people desperate to believe either it's true or it's not true, that King UFO himself could come out and literally live tweet his day abducting cows, and it would just disappear into the maelstrom of nonsense content that is out there.
You know, you look at Canada with Shag Harbour, you know, that's an incredible incident that makes no sense. And here we are, what, 57 years ago, people still, there's a Shag Harbour UFO festival every year, I believe.
Can you briefly describe the events of Shag Harbour?
Yeah, Shag Harbour, a object was seen plunging into the harbour and was witnessed moving through the water, illuminating it, and lots of Canadian and American military vehicles turned up trying to search it, and allegedly there were strange markings all across the bottom of the bed at the bottom. And then people had claimed that they saw it shoot back out again, and off it went. Another one with multiple witnesses. Obviously, there was, you know, a couple of juicy cases from the 60s in Canada. You've got Shag Harbour and Falcon Lake. which is another one which was explained away as a drunk man falling on a barbecue.
And that happens a lot in Canada. I don't know that anyone usually points to it as evidence of extraterrestrial presence, but I know some people that happen to.
Yeah, amateur geologists are always taking barbecues with them to go rock hunting.
It's an epidemic, really.
But yeah, Stefan Michalak, I believe. Michalak, however you want to pronounce his surname. Yeah, he was drunk and fell on a barbecue. That's why, because he got this strange grill burn on his stomach. There's photos of it, and he ended up in hospital and all sorts. He got severe burns. If you Google Stefan Michalak, Falcon Lake, you can see the pictures of his burnt stomach. And it's like a cylindrical pattern, about, 10 across and 6 down, all across his lower chest and stomach.
Interesting. Oh, ouch. Oh, yeah, so Stan Michalak can still vividly remember when his dad came home sick, injured after something happened in the Falcon Lake woods of Manitoba on the May Long weekend of 1967. It was something that put his family life into upheaval and remains one of the world's best-known UFO encounters. And sorry, I should mention this is from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. So if you're from the US and you don't know, this is like NPR or something, or the BBC. So Michalak goes on to say, I recalled seeing him in bed. He didn't look good at all. He looked pale, haggard. Michalak was 9 years old at the time and was allowed to see his dad for a couple of minutes on the day after what had soon become known as the Falcon Lake incident. Then there was the smell. When I walked into the bedroom, there was a huge stink in the room, like a real horrible aroma of sulfur and burnt motor. It was all around and was coming out of his pores. It was bad. So that was from 2017, because I guess Michalak's son, Stan, he has written a book with Canadian UFO researcher Chris Rutkowski. And Chris is kind of the guy, like nowadays, if you contact the government with a sighting, they send you to Chris.
Yep. He's your UFO researcher. he is the Canada UFO research.
Yeah, he's the guy. I spoke to him when I first started researching Strange, and I didn't know shit about shit, and he was very patient with me. Very friendly guy.
Yeah, he's a good lad. I keep meaning to try and get him on, actually. I've been meaning to do it for a couple of years, actually.
That is a conversation I would like to hear. All right, so we're going to take a quick break from stories for a similarly themed article. This story comes from around 1965, and it involves the actress Goldie Hawn, which I was not expecting when I started putting this episode together. It's from an interview done by Vanity Fair for a profile in 2023. So I'm going to read you the article, and then Paul and I are going to talk about it. And now the article is not lengthy. It's a couple paragraphs. It is part of a longer article. I've kind of trimmed it down, but you'll get the gist of it. A dancer by trade, Hawn was just a 20-year-old in Anaheim, California when she first began wondering about the great unknown. That was a time when, there was a lot of UFO sightings, says Hawn during the episode. I remember this so clearly. I went outside my door and I sat on the little ledge and I looked up at the dark sky and I saw all these stars. And all I could think of was, how far does this go? How little are we? Are we the only planet in the whole wide universe that has life on it? And I got to tell you, Paul, just stopping right here, I feel like such an asshole because I have never once in my life considered Goldie Hawn to be the kind of person who asks these questions. And clearly I was wrong. So my apologies to Ms. Hawn.
Yeah, well, that's always been Goldie Hawn's secret weapon is people looked at her and thought she was stupid.
I won't say I thought she was stupid, but it just never occurred to me to think that she was someone who would ponder the mysteries of the universe. And again, I'm happy to be proven wrong. All right, so the article goes on. 4 months later, the future First Wives Club star was working another dance job in West Covina, California, a city that's very close to the desert, as she's careful to note. Exhausted from dance rehearsals, Hawn asked a friend if she could take a nap in his car, a decision that still baffles her to this day. I don't know why I said that, she says. I don't know why I didn't just lie down on the bleachers. After getting into the car to sleep, I got this high-pitched sound in my ear, she says. It was this high frequency. That's when she looked out the window. I saw these 2 or 3 triangular-shaped heads, Hawn recalls. They were silver in color, slashes for a mouth, tiny little nose, no ears. They were pointing at me in the car as if they were discussing me like I was a subject, and they were droning. Throughout her encounter with the 2 to 3 silver-headed creatures, she was unable to move her body. Hawn says, I was paralyzed, and I thought, oh my God, I want to get up. I didn't know if it was real or not real. Eventually, Hawn was able to burst out of the episode, she says. It was like bursting out of a force field, she recounts. of course, I go back to all the kids and stuff, and I went, oh my God, I think I made contact with outer space. Hawn tells us that years later, she discussed her apparent extraterrestrial experience with an astrophysicist at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I want to talk to you about that, Hawn recalls him saying. I've been basically researching this for 25 years, and I'd like to know your experience. The memories, Hawn says, came flooding back. They touched my face, says an emotional Hawn. They touched my face, and it felt like the finger of God. It was the most benevolent, loving feeling. This was powerful. It was filled with light. I thought that was really interesting, Paul, because so often in media, and I know we're doing a little bit here because, hey, that's the show, but UFO experiences are often painted as strongly negative, as very frightening things. And what I find interesting is that's even like cursory or kind of research on my part shows that that's not really the case. I mean, they're not necessarily all love and light, but they're not as sinister as they're made out to be. And when you start kind of going back to like the 60s and some of that contactee stuff that happened, like with Goldie Hawn, the messaging does seem positive. It seems to be like the kind of messaging that's like, stop it with the fucking nuclear weapons, or you really need to take care of this planet you're on. You know that, right? And those messages, I feel, based again on only cursory research, because I'm far from an expert in this field, I feel like those stories get shit on from a great height more than anything else.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those that often, as with we see in the paranormal these days, you know, every ghost story you see on television is negative. It's all terrifying. It's all demons. It's all people being attacked and physically hurt by them. Whereas if you look at the body of evidence throughout the history of the paranormal, the vast majority of ghost encounters are shocking, but not frightening, surprising, not terrifying, interesting, mysterious. And it's the same in ufology, that it's only people saying the terrifying things that seem to break through often. And then when you look at it, I mean, to be fair, I've spoken with 3 experiences. All would say that their experiences were negative. But I've also heard from others who are extremely positive about what's happened to them. For example, Preston Dennett's collected hundreds of reports from people who have had positive repercussions from experiences, even to having their health repaired, for God's sakes. I mean, there was that story we were talking about, we mentioned it a couple of times, where one guy was taken and he was talking to them and they did an examination and everything, and they said, here's our gift to you. And they gave him a jar with all the tar they'd extracted out of his lungs from 30 years of smoking.
Funny enough, I have that one written down. I was going to ask you about that one.
I'd rather have a jumper, thanks. You know?
I don't know.
Fruit basket.
Take the shit out of my body. And Lord knows all the horrible shit I've done to my body over the last 41 years. Please help me undo some of this, aliens.
It's like Brandon Lee in The Crow, pulling all that heroin out that woman's arm.
Oh, I forgot about that scene. Yeah.
So, but, you know, I mean, when I've spoken to Philip Kinsella, I mean, he obviously views his experience very negatively. He's been on shows in the States before where he's basically been derided and told that he's stupid and not mentally prepared for what happened to him because it's all love and light in these people's opinions. And it isn't. As with anything, certain people will have bad experiences. That doesn't mean everybody will have a bad experience, but it also doesn't mean that person who's having a bad experience, it's basically turning the victim into, oh, well, what do you expect? You weren't ready for it. You're not mentally prepared enough. You don't have the intelligence to comprehend what's happening to you. That's why you were frightened. And so, once again, you have these frictions going on between all that.
It's like someone trying to talk you into polyamory. It's like, oh, you're just not evolved enough for it. Like, no, come on, back off. No, really, you're missing out. Hey, I don't like board games that much. Come on. I agree I can love more than one person at one time. I just don't have the patience or time.
One's pushing it, innit? Really? I mean,
it's so much time, Paul.
It's a lot of effort.
And the communication and all the time. They all seem like they love talking. And again, hey, if you can pull it off, God love you. Have fun. Yes. Enjoy it for the rest of us who are just real assholes who barely have the time to focus on one thing.
Absolutely. You should listen to Goldie Hawn. If you get married, you will be divorced.
Did she say that?
Yes. That's why she said her and Kurt Russell have never married. But it's quite odd because obviously Goldie Hawn's experience has only recently come back into the lexicon of celebrity UFO experiences, whereas Kurt is quite famous for anybody in ufology because he was an eyewitness to the Phoenix Lights because he was flying one of his sons. It's a great lift, isn't it, this? He was flying one of his sons to his girlfriend's. Hey, Dad, can you give me a lift? Yeah, jump in the plane, son. We'll go.
Jesus.
Pew.
My dad wouldn't even give me free taxi rides when he was a taxi driver.
So, and as they were coming in, he saw the 6 lights in a V formation over the airport. And so he called it in because he was concerned. And he said the strangest thing about it was, after he reported it, landed the plane and everybody went, he forgot about it for like 10, 15 years. And then him and Goldie were sat down and she started watching a documentary about the Phoenix Lights. And he said it was literally like somebody had lifted the veil off my head. And I was like, that's what I saw. That was me. And he said, I can't explain why I forgot about it for 15 years. I cannot tell you. I remember seeing him talk about it. He actually did it out the blue on the BBC.
Oh, right, yeah.
He was obviously promoting a film, but it was odd that they were doing something about the Phoenix Lights. So it was obviously in March because they were talking about it being the anniversary. And he was on the show. I've always been under the impression somebody must have known this. Because for me, it's too much of a coincidence that they did this thing about the Phoenix Lights and Kurt Russell was a guest on the show.
Yeah, that's not possible for that to be coincidental.
As Jim Harold says, when is too much of a coincidence not a coincidence?
Yeah, exactly.
And so they said, oh, so what do you think, Kurt? And he says, well, I know it happened because I saw it. And they went, what? What? Taking this show to a new level now, Kurt. And he just basically explained what I've just said. Exactly what happened, matter of fact. So it's weird that was that one of the things, was Kurt Russell interested in UFOs when he met Goldie Hawn? Or is this something that, as often, are people predetermined to find each other through a common experience that pulls them closer together? Because obviously Goldie's experience is from the 60s, Kurt's was from the 90s. So I don't know.
It's fascinating shit. And again, I had no idea that she had this experience. It was just, again, in a random thread, I found a reference to this and found the Vanity Fair profile, and here we are.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. 79 she is this year.
Is she?
Yeah.
I guess, that makes sense because she was born in 45.
Yeah. She was born when the UFO wave began. Now, is that more than coincidence? Is she actually an alien?
Teach the controversy. That's what I say. Please don't sue us, Goldie Hawn. We are fans.
Yes, of you
Just
and
kidding. She's not
and
fucking
Kurt.
listening to this show.
I bet she is.
Oh, those scamps. Send Stavros to kill them both. Tell King UFO to go take them out.
Kamloops, Canada, 2022. The night of May the 19th, 2022, I was in Kamloops, British Columbia. We were driving around and had parked in a lot somewhere in Sahali to smoke a joint. At one point, me and my friend were outside of the car and he spotted what he thought were 2 drones in the sky. I looked at them and immediately could tell that they were not drones. But I didn't think they were stars either. Me and my friend started bickering back and forth as to what those drones were doing, or if in fact they were just extra bright stars. We ended up spending hours watching them. When we watched it, we kept looking away to see if maybe it was our eyes, but it wasn't. They were always there when we looked back, and they were moving weirdly, like nothing we'd ever seen before. Not only that, they were making little, almost inchworm-like movement patterns. Then they would stop in one spot and change in formation or shape. It's almost impossible to explain what exactly we were watching because I don't have the specific words for some of the things the lights were doing in the sky. We ended up actually falling asleep at the car, staring at them. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. and right away looked up into the sky to see what I kept calling my weird star. And it was not where it had been. Then, after I woke my friend up, I was looking around the sky a bit more, and the weird star was in fact still up there, just in a different spot. Now it was almost directly above us, which is why I couldn't see it, because I was looking literally everywhere else. It now looked way different than before. It wasn't continuously changing shapes, but it was completely still, and its many little companion lights were arranged in such a way as to make a V. But in the middle of the V, and in the rest of that space, it was filled up with lots of single little lights, creating the whole thing to become a perfect circle. All the lights were the same colour as normal stars, but way brighter. But the only time we could see the circle shape formed was when it was directly above us. Those lights had very light tinges of green and red, but at the same time they still had that white light glow. The whole time we watched them, they were always constantly changing into different shapes or formations. There were small moments though, like maybe 5 seconds or something, that they would be in a still position, and it was always V-shaped. This literally made me start wondering if what we were seeing was actually some kind of figment of my imagination. So I kept asking my friend over and over throughout this time if they were seeing what I was seeing, and to be honest with me, if they weren't. I didn't know how to handle what I had thought of all of this. Also, at one point there was a very short, 3 or 4 seconds, where it did something way different, but this only happened once. One of them looked like it could have been spinning for a second, but when it stopped, it was definitely facing the other way, and we were looking at a side of it that did not have any lights. We could now see that there was a 3D dark grey light colour, but in a weird way it blended with the sky. We could only see this because the glowing of the light behind it. It didn't look like a smooth edge shape at this view either. It looked kind of like it could have resembled a sort of squarish rectangle from side to side, a sort of rocky shape. It was really hard to tell because it was so far away, and it only lasted like that for a few seconds. I was explaining everything to my sister when I got dropped back off at her place the next morning, and I was struggling to find the right words to describe what I saw. I realised I felt embarrassed in a weird way, even though I knew what I saw was real, and there were 2 of us.
Back when I was doing Strange, there was a fellow I spoke to. He was a friend of mine at the time, and he had seen something with a friend of his, but she had come around to the same place as this person. They were too embarrassed to talk about it. They wouldn't even have an off-the-record conversation with me. They just wanted to memory hole the whole thing. Also, I didn't mention this last time, but I think they'll be fine with me. Kamloops, which is the town in BC that this person is describing, which is, of course, not far from Revelstoke, that is the same place where the person who texted me during the last Talk Spooky show, that is where they saw their sighting in the pre-dawn sky. And Kamloops has a long history of weird shit. A lot of paranormal stuff. I've heard a lot of stories of shadow people from Kamloops and the surrounding area. And then I found this while researching the show, and it's actually an article from the Vernon Morning Star, which is, Vernon is a town about 2 hours away from Kamloops. It's dated March 5th, 2019 by Lachlan Lebere, or Lebere. Lachlan, I don't know which it is, and if I'm getting it wrong, I apologize. Now, again, I've excerpted this, but there is a longer article I've given, and this is the meat of it. I'll put a link in the show notes to the full article if you want to read it. But Lachlan says, extraterrestrial visitations are not unusual in the Shuswap. There have been several UFO sightings reported over the years. One occurred April 2nd, 2015 in Salmon Arm. A witness described a massive gray saucer shape that made no sound. Another occurred in 2003 near Mara Lake. It was described as diamond-shaped, with a cluster of lights in the size of a 3-story house. Another sighting was reported in 2003 near Sicamous, in which RCMP were contacted. I might view these stories as entertaining curiosities if I didn't have my own UFO-ish experience. It occurred on a dark evening in the mid to late 1990s in Kamloops. There were clouds low and thick in the sky. I was in the front living room of my folks' home when a bright light came shining through the window. Everything electrical from the TV to the lights dimmed or shut off momentarily, starting from the front of the house and moving to the back as the light in the sky moved slowly, silently overhead. The source of this massive funnel of radiation hidden in the clouds stopped over the South Thompson River, where it lingered for about a minute. Then the funnel appeared to close up on the spot, as though the source had shot straight up into the sky. I don't know if what I saw was a UFO. Maybe it was some experimental Canadian military stealth-seeking helicopter technology. Regardless, the experience made me want to believe. And I find that shit fascinating, Paul, because like you and I have talked so many times, stories about electrical malfunction when UFO things are going on.
Yeah, it doesn't happen all the time, but there's enough really good reports. I mean, several of them, especially, I mean, I'm not too sure these days. Maybe, this shows the evolving power of the auto industry, I would imagine, that obviously cars these days are far more reliable than they were 50, 60 years ago.
I don't know. I didn't have to do a USB software update for my first car.
Well, there is that, I suppose. But you would get a lot of people who would see UFOs, and obviously Close Encounters is a brilliant example of some of those early cases, because a lot of the scenes in in Close Encounters of the Third Kind are based on real events. Like the police cars chasing them and all that. They're real UFO events that have been repurposed for Close Encounters. So everything that goes on around it is based on a real UFO encounter. So you have loads of reports from the 50s and 60s and 70s of people seeing UFOs and their cars stop, their cars break down. We've had them over here where people's cars have stopped when they've had a UFO sighting. There's one in the Peak District where she was chased. A lady and her children were in a car and they were chased by a UFO to their farm. And as they got to the farm, the car died. They ran in, told their husband, he came out, tried the car, it worked straight away. So then he's thinking, well, you just got overexcited. Oh, you've got overexcited, woman.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. But this then became a repeat thing, and then dozens of people saw these lights flying around this valley and illuminating, as we were saying about the one in California, illuminating the whole area with a bright white light that didn't hurt their eyes, but it was the brightest light they'd ever seen. You get them all the time. And so mechanical things these days, it's interesting, people's phones stop working. People can't take a picture, or it can't seem to focus properly, or the battery dies. Why?
Of course, I mean, I've said before, that was my experience in Lizzie Borden house. When everyone went to bed, I tried to take some pictures just to send them to Nick, and nothing would work. The camera the app would open, but if I tried to take a picture, it would just crash.
Yeah. I mean, when I saw the strange thing I saw back in 2010, what I saw and what I filmed just looked like two completely different things. It was weird.
Oh, really?
Because I recorded it for about 10 minutes and it looked crap. It could have been anything. It looked like a light just in the sky. Could have been old. But I know where I saw and I know where it wasn't. I mean, I watched it for 45 minutes. So, this wasn't a fleeting thing. And I didn't lose any time. Right. I didn't get sucked out the window, taken to Venus.
I know in this story, I actually cleaned up the language quite a bit in this story because honestly, it seemed like what they saw, I think they actually had a hard time describing what they were seeing. Because again, I had to do quite a bit of work to make it comprehensible. This was a story submitted to a UFO reporting website. And so they don't process anything. They just post it as the person submits it. But the confusion is what really sold me on the story. It was just sort of coincidence that it happened to be Kamloops, but they just seemed really, really troubled by their inability to describe what they were seeing. And that's what kind of made me want to share it, was just the fact that, it was so baffling. And I know, 2022, we're in the age of drones, but they watched that for hours. And I looked, the only drones that can fly for hours are the ones that, let's just face it, if it's coming for you, you don't have a lot of time left.
Yeah.
They're the kind of drones that have a payload specification.
Yeah. And they are very distinct drones. You can see what a drone is, and you can hear a drone.
I mean, I can see if it's high enough up. They use UAVs to patrol the border, like the ocean between Victoria and Washington State. And they're high enough up, you can see them, but you can't hear them. So it's not impossible that you wouldn't hear a drone, but you're not an insurgent. So the odds of you seeing this thing, especially in Kamloops, I think are pretty slim. And even then, it would be a solid light moving, if anything. It wouldn't be doing whatever the fuck it was this person was trying to communicate. Because again, they really had a hard time expressing what they were seeing.
It's essentially like a bit of PTSD. As I said earlier on, at the end of the day, you have an experience that is not supposed to be real.
Merritt, Canada, 1996. Back in the early summer of 1995 in Merritt, BC, while I was up the Coldwater Road Valley by the intersection with Coldwater Road and Coquihalla Highway, I was sitting outside on the porch of my friend's house with my friend, having a smoke. Something made me look up, and what I saw was a huge black flying triangle, which I will describe in more detail later. Now, at the time I had never heard of such a craft. I always assumed that UFOs were small saucer craft that zipped back and forth with flashing lights, nothing more than that, and that was if they even existed at all. At the time, I was not privy to the internet, and after the experience, never thought about it much as I just had no explanation whatsoever. That was until I watched UFO Hunters on TV in 2010, and they had an episode on giant flying triangles. I almost fell out of my chair when I remembered what I had seen and realized that the phenomenon was much more prevalent than I had ever thought. What I sat there staring up at 15 years prior was a massive object. I vividly remember describing it back and forth with my friend as we sat there. It was like looking at the bottom of an iron you would use to iron your clothes. It was not a perfect triangle shape, but the sides were curved a little and the back was straight across, slightly longer in length than width. Basically the shape of the bottom of a clothes iron multiplied by several 100,000 in size. I could only see the bottom and could not tell how thick it was as it was a dark, clear night and only stars lit the sky. There was no ambient lighting from any nearby cities. We kept saying to each other, "Do you see what I'm seeing?" Then we would describe it to each other as if we thought maybe the other person couldn't see it or one of us was going nuts. The craft had small, faint, dim red lights dotted along the bottom side edges, maybe 20 per side or so. The whole craft seemed to be slightly cloaked. This part is hard to explain. You could see it, but it was kind of faint. It blocked out the stars as it passed between them in my line of sight, and that was basically how I could tell the shape, except I could see the outline. It made no noise as it passed over and flew at what I noted to be a very slow speed. If I had to approximate a speed, I might say a couple 100 kilometers an hour. I really don't like to estimate the speed because I could be off, but it seemed to move slowly through the sky and didn't seem very high up, maybe 4 to 6 or 7,000 feet. It could have been lower, I don't know. I am a poor judge of altitude and it was dark and I just really couldn't tell. It didn't help that it was, as I mentioned earlier, slightly cloaked. It passed over us, and we just sat there and stared at it and made comments about it to each other until it went out of sight over the opposite bridge to the west. We talked about it for 10 minutes as it passed over. As the craft flew, it came from the east and flew to the west. I have never seen anything unexplainable in my life before this, nor since, despite often gazing up at the night sky while outside. This was a one-time UFO experience for me, but after watching UFO Hunters and the Flying Triangle episode, I realized I wasn't going crazy that night and felt compelled to share my story in the event that it helps someone uncover the truth in regards to what these craft are. And I mean, we had a story on the episode Black Triangles and Revelations, which was very similar to this. That was from last season. And that was a listener story actually from, I want to say, your neck of the woods.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. We love a black triangle over here. So this is one of my favourite British stories. And this happened on the 16th of November, 1963. Remember this date, okay? So on that chilly autumn evening, 17-year-old John Flaxton, his friend, 18-year-old Mervyn Hutchinson, and 2 other friends were walking home from a party on Sandling Road in the county of Kent, which is a region apparently rife with cryptozoological and paranormal activity, when they saw a silent, glowing, orb-like object descend from the heavens. This unusual, self-illuminated ovoid object, which was described as being just a few meters in diameter, hovered above a field. Eventually it made its way behind some trees and settled into the shadowy foliage of the woods of Sandling Park. Whilst the teenagers were still reeling from this astonishing sighting, something more unbelievable soon grabbed their attention. Moments after the extraordinary craft had apparently landed behind the trees, the teens began to notice a shaking in the bush, and what emerged was one of the most unique creatures ever chronicled in ufology. Later, the 4 horrified eyewitnesses described how an erratic, shambling, quasi-humanoid figure emerged from the woods and waddled towards them. The beast looked like a headless bat and was approximately 5 feet tall, had large webbed feet and wings protruding from its back. In Hutchinson's own words, it didn't seem to have any head. There were these huge wings on its back, like bat wings. The group of friends, understandably overwhelmed with terror and adrenaline, sprinted away from the freakish bat thing and made their way to the nearest police station. Once there, they related their tale to one, which must assume they were highly sceptical officers. Flaxton would later state that he had felt cold all over during the episode. A week later, another witness, Keith Croucher, confirmed the teen's sighting of the strange object soaring through the skies when he too announced that he'd seen the oddly shaped craft hovering over the local football field, not far from where Flaxton and his friends had seen it. Another report came the day after, which was too outrageous to be ignored, and more people had seen the strange light. Now, people may not be surprised, so I'll show you a picture of it and tell me what you think that looks like.
Dracula?
Mm-hmm. Or does it remind you of something else that turned up 3 years later in a small American state called West Virginia?
Oh, Mothman.
Yeah. So yes, the shambling bat creature of Kent, 1963, terrifying a group of teenagers so much they ran to the local police station.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Brilliant story.
It kind of looks like the Van Meter visitor too, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very weird creature. Very strange. But yeah, it's a great little story, that.
That's fantastic. See? That's what you get with Paul Bessel, folks.
Yes, that's from Philip Mantle's UFO Landings UK book, which collects a whole raft of encounters from the British Isles from the turn of the 20th century to the modern day.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. I know Philip's interviews with you are always very, very interesting.
He's not from the best part of Yorkshire, but he's okay, I suppose.
No one's perfect.
Yes, King of Pontefract is old Philip, bless him. Lovely man.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Wonder if he knows King UFO.
Well, over here, he probably is King UFO. Our final story for tonight comes from Surrey, Canada, in 1997. On the evening of April the 1st, 1997, I was leaving the house to go out with some friends and was just in the driveway chatting with a friend of my mother's. They were attending university at that time, and she was just leaving a night of studying with my mother. She wasn't a friend of mine, and I didn't really know her very well. But I'd just like to emphasise no drugs or alcohol had been consumed by any of us that evening. The horizon of stars were very visible in the night sky above us. We were distracted from our conversation when we noticed that the stars began to twinkle and flash repeatedly all across the sky. I had never seen stars go from normal stars to that many flashing stars before. We were looking up and across the sky trying to figure out what was causing this to happen when something came into view in the sky behind us. We were looking west, and this object travelled east to west, so it came up from behind us and overhead. There are certain details about this object which stand out very clearly to me, but there are also aspects of this sighting that I have a hard time remembering, almost as if I'd dreamed it. The two of us said to each other numerous times, "You can see this too, right?" The object was gigantic and seemed to be travelling quite low and far too slow for any aircraft I had experienced in person. It was shaped like a wide arrowhead. Not quite an isosceles triangle, because the rear of the craft was curved outwards, not a distinct flat line. I don't recall any lights on this vessel whatsoever. It was only visible by the lights in our driveway and the outline of the ship against the sky. I don't recall any sound whatsoever coming from the vessel. I've seen commercial airlines come into land and the sound is extremely loud from the engines, but this craft had no sound and was too slow and too low for me to comprehend what I was seeing. As it moved over our heads continuing west, we could make out vague details of the underside of the craft that looked like pipes or channels. At the risk of losing any credibility, the only remotely accurate way I could describe it would be imagine looking up at a Star Destroyer ship that is so iconic from the Star Wars films. This is what I mean when I say I could see a dim-channeled metalwork underneath when I looked up. I am by no means an expert at deciphering airspeed or the height of a moving craft, as I have no flight knowledge, but I would describe the speed and distance this way. If I were to hold my hand up over my face, I'd still be able to see the craft on all sides. It would not come close to fully blocking my vision of it. As for speed, it would travel the length of my hand, raised over my head and between my line of sight and the craft, in about 3 to 5 seconds. As the craft continued slowly west and was no longer overhead of our property line, the back of the craft lit up white, and it flew high and north before vanishing. The only thing more astonishing than the slow speed of a flying object so large and low is how lightning fast it disappeared from our sight. At the rate it was travelling, we should have been able to see it for another few minutes at least, but it seemed to raise higher and vanish heading north in under 3 seconds. Within a few moments of the object vanishing, the stars began to blink slower and eventually resumed the standard stars in the night sky, which we could be considered as normal. The two of us were at a loss for words to describe what we saw at the time, and we went back into the house to tell my mother and other family members. My mother was surprised to see her classmate was still there, as she thought she'd gone home 10 minutes earlier. We both told the same story, and we were believed for the most part because we weren't friends who would collaborate the story for a laugh, and not to mention an age gap of at least 10 years. A family member said, "Good luck getting anybody to believe you though, it's April Fool's Day." After a while I kept trying to make sense of what I'd seen, and I decided to call the non-emergency police line. Seems odd not to look online or on my phone, but hey, it was 1997. We did have internet at the time, but the internet wasn't really the go-to place for real-time alerts and posted updates. When the operator answered, I told her what we saw, and I said, "You probably think this is a joke because it's April Fool's Day, but it isn't." She said, "We've had a few hundred calls about this in the last 45 minutes, so you're not the only one." She took down my info and said someone might contact me, but nobody ever did. If only that man had listened to Art Bell, he would have been able to get in touch with Peter Davenport.
And for the folks who don't know, can you explain who Peter Davenport was?
Peter Davenport still is
Okay.
the head of the National UFO Reporting Centre, NUFOC.
Oh, okay.
And Peter was obviously very active in the 90s and noughties. I believe his health is restricting him a lot. His son's doing a lot of work there these days, but you've always got time for somebody who lives in a disused missile silo, haven't you?
I feel like I would be concerned about not having time for them.
Exactly. But yes, that report should have gone there. It's very similar to the craft people describe seeing at Phoenix as well.
Oh, interesting, with the tubing and such.
Yeah. And it's and the shape of it, that was described, Phoenix was described as an arrowhead shaped, a wide arrow shape, a triangular craft, V shape.
It's sort of interesting, like the prevalence of triangular craft here, that was not intentional. I just kind of looked for stories that fit the topic that were long enough for our purposes, but I thought it was interesting that we came out with a bunch of these arrowhead type things. Yeah.
And it's only 2 weeks after the Phoenix Lights experience as well, then. I mean, this is the thing, as people will say, well, they said it was flares, whatever. That does not explain, I believe at the moment there are 1,300 witnesses to what happened over Phoenix that night.
That's incredible.
The vast majority of them saw a giant craft pass over them. They couldn't see the stars through it. It wasn't paragliders, it wasn't flares, it wasn't a misidentified plane. You can say what you want. When people say, oh, those lights, they were just the flares, what they're wanting you to focus on is that particular aspect of that experience.
Right.
Not the 1,200 witnesses who saw a craft fly over them and they could look up and it looked like the biggest thing they'd ever seen in their life. Like you said earlier on when you were talking about disinformation and the character assassinations and things that go on, when you look at that particular thing, when you see programs about it or you hear people talk about it, they talk about people seeing the lights. They don't talk about over 1,000 people seeing an enormous craft passing over them all the way. Not just over Phoenix, it came down into Arizona and flew over Phoenix on its way past. Thousands of people All over the state saw it. It didn't just happen over Phoenix. That was the culmination, because obviously that was the largest city that it happened to pass over. But it had passed over loads of towns and villages on its way there, and hundreds of people saw it. But it's flares.
I do find it a really interesting topic, not necessarily because I know for certain that, this is ET coming over to hang out with us on the weekend, but just because, as with the paranormal, something is happening. You can't ignore it. You can't hand wave it away. You can say, is some of it military craft operating at a technological level that the public does not have access to yet? And that may account for some of it. Likely doesn't account for all of it, because there are things witnessed which simply don't make sense. And there are intersections with other things we've talked about on the show, which are a little more within our wheelhouse, that, again, the technological explanation doesn't cover. So I one of the things I wanted folks to take away from this is just that there is more going on under this particular banner than I think people like to give credit for. And it can't be dismissed as easily as perhaps some people would like it to be.
As with anything, though, only takes one to be proved real, and all bets are off.
Yeah, no, that's it.
Even Blue Book, in its design to explain everything away, still ended up with 30% of the cases it couldn't explain. It couldn't say it was swamp gas or a cloud or Venus. But nobody talks about that. Nobody says, well, hang on, we've got hundreds of cases here that can't be explained. That people, astronomers, people who discovered Pluto didn't understand what they were looking at. Hundreds of people seeing hundreds of craft flying above them. People being taken, allegedly. Some of the experiences I've spoken to. It would be a phenomenal work of fiction to create a story of such magnitude. Put it out there into the world for everybody to dissect on your behalf, which I think is one of the things where we don't get as many full experiencer cases like Walton or Whitley Strieber or the Hills or the Cash Landrum case or things like that, or Pascagoula or wherever, because people look at how they're treated and what they've done. Yes, the environment these days is slightly better, but if you look at everything that's going on in the US Congress, they're not touching on experiences. They're not touching on abductions. They're not touching on people having communication. They're simply focusing on sightings. So even now, in this era of disclosure, they are forcing the conversation to be on a fixed point of the phenomenon, and nothing else around it will be discussed. So they're not talking about UFOs. This isn't disclosure. What they're talking about is a section of the phenomenon. It'd be like talking about ghosts and only talking about white ladies.
I think part of that is because it allows them to focus on the technology without any of the other implications. Because I think if you start talking about experiences, if you start talking about possible abductees, then you have to really contend with all the different parts of that, right? You kind of have to acknowledge that there are things about this that don't make sense. There are things about this that challenge what we think we know about consciousness. This is not something governments are good at. And I think especially right now in North America, we have a problem with sort of creeping religious fundamentalism. And it is, influencing policy, which is influencing sort of the Overton window and what we're willing to discuss. Because as I've mentioned on the show before, one of the things that got the remote viewing program shut down was a belief that they were doing witchcraft. That's on the record. I've heard that from remote viewers themselves. I've also seen it in print. Because obviously remote viewing is not an exact science, but it works better than you might think. And the government did it for 20 plus years. The US government had several different programs under different agencies doing remote viewing for, again, roughly about 22 years, something thereabouts. And they were shut down because, according to one of the remote viewers, I believe it was a member of Congress, told him, this is witchcraft. I don't want us participating in witchcraft. And that tells you all you need to know.
Yeah, that kind of thought was shared by certain army officials in the 60s that claimed that UFOs were demons.
Oh, really? Interesting.
So it permeates all aspects of it. I would not be surprised if there's some officials out there who believe that. Well, we know that because some people claim that Bigfoot's the Nephilim.
Of course, God, yeah, that's a rabbit hole. Folks, you're lucky we don't have time for Bigfoot and the Nephilim.
I can sum it up in very briefly for you. It's bullshit. It saved you all hours Hours of shit.
And if you take one thing away from Ghost Story, guys, we like to save you from hours of shit.
By making you listen to our shit.
Exactly. That's a much more palatable shit.
Good shit.
Yeah, the good shit. Yeah, exactly. Ghost Story, guys. The good shit.
The best of shits.
That's going to be our greatest hits album. Next time we have to do a compilation when I'm out of town, we'll just be like, the best of shits.
Shit or bus.
All right, guys, that has been our episode on cosmic terror. We hope you've enjoyed some UFO stories. Let us know, ghoststoryguys@gmail.com. What'd you think? Would you like to see more stuff like this, less stuff like this? Do you like our haircuts? I'm kidding. We're both very bald, and this is an audio medium.
Yes, I've moisturised today.
You do look very shiny.
Thank you. Got to now. The sun's creeping back. We've got a polar vortex stuck over us at the minute.
In June?
It's night. Yes. It's trapped. It's trapped the jet stream. It can't get to us at the moment. It was 9 degrees the other day.
Brutal. Well, pray for Paul. Paul needs summer.
I do. I've noticed it's creeping up. The football starts at the end of next week. The weather begins to improve. Clearly, we're all supposed to be in the beer garden for 4 weeks. That's what it's telling me.
God's a football fan. You heard it here first.
All religious deities love sport.
Exactly. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Hey there, listeners. Before you reach for that skip 15 seconds ahead button, I promise you this isn't an ad. We wanted to take a minute to talk to you about mental health. On this show, I've always tried to be as honest and open as possible about my struggles with depression and anxiety, because even though we've come a long way towards acknowledging the very real damage these things can do, there is still way too much lingering stigma about reaching out for help. And when you start to feel like there's no help, it's easy to start feeling like there's no hope. But Paul has joined me today to remind you there is always hope and there's always help.
We're not going to try and talk you out of self-harming right now, because we know that's not how it works. Instead, what we wanted to do was tell you something now and hope that should things get bad, you'll remember it and make a phone call or send a text message before you make any permanent decisions. As someone who knows all too well just how important mental health can be, it's never too late to reach out.
In Canada, the number to call is 133-456-4566. In the USA, the new number to call is 988. That's 988.
In the UK, the number to call is 116123 or text SHOUT, that's SHOUT, to 85258. In Australia, the number to call is 131114.
However bad shit seems, it will pass. And no matter what your brain might be telling you at any given moment, and believe me when I say I know this intimately, there are people who love you and people who care deeply about how you treat yourself. Should a time come when you find yourself despairing, please know that we've both been where you are, and there is a way back to the world. Take care. Welcome back. The Ghost Story guys are Luke Greensmith, who helps us find our stories. He is also host of the Luke Lord podcast, available everywhere fine podcasts live. Tanya Downing, who assists with editing and manages our Facebook community. She is also co-host of the Streaming into Madness podcast with Walter Whitaker. Adam Lynch, who edits our videos and is host of the Weekly Creep podcast with Dulce. Joseph Camo, who manages our YouTube account and is host of the Sociology Professor YouTube channel. Sarah Kent, who manages our Reddit community.
Our extraterrestrial captain guiding us across the universe is Mr. Brennan Storr.
First star to the left and straight on till morning. I'm going to leave that in. I'm not proud of it, but I'm going to leave it in. And of course, my friend and co-host, my very own, I guess really you'd be Bones.
He's dead, Jed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the bones on this Starship Enterprise the one and only Paul Bestel, the paranormal Johnny Carson himself, host of Mysteries and Monsters. Paul, what's coming up on M&M?
Coming up, I'm visiting a couple of states in the US. John Olson returns to tell me about his latest book, Strange Utah, which features some unusual stories of first-person encounters across a pantheon of weird phenomena. And then the lovely Jeff Finnop joins me to talk about some of Wisconsin's stranger legends and some of its more darker residents of its past.
Very cool. And where can everyone find you online?
You can find Mysteries and Monsters across all social media platforms, as well as across all podcast sites.
Fantastic. I'm largely the truth on Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd. And you can find my horror movie show, Weird Together, co-hosted with Professor Joseph Camo, everywhere fine podcasts live. On the latest episode, we talk about the new werewolf film Blackout, directed by Larry Fessenden. And of course, Weird Together, we dissect the sociology behind movies, because I like to say we don't know enough about movies to properly review them, but we can talk about what they're about, and we do that with Blackout. As we said at the top of the show, we can only do this because of our subscribers. The fine folks on Patreon, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube are the ones who really pay our bills. And so we'd like to thank them very, very much. And if you want to join those communities to get not only bonus conversations between me and Paul for almost every main story episode, but early ad-free release, bonus shows like Host Adventures. At the higher tiers, you get access to things like our monthly live show. And of course, at $20 and up, you get thanked every second story episode as part of Ghost Force. If any of that sounds good to you, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. Or sign up to Ghost Story Guys Premium via Apple Podcasts or on YouTube. If you want to pick up any Ghost Story Guys merch, head to our website at ghoststoryguys.com. You'll find all kinds of cool stuff there. You'll also find full show notes for every episode. Shout out to our composer, Rainy Days for Ghosts. Rainy Days for Ghosts is a project of film journalist and composer Harper Smith. You can find more from Harper at rainydaysforghosts.bandcamp.com or by searching for Rainy Days for Ghosts or Street Witch on streaming platforms everywhere. Our theme song, Radio, Into the Darkness We Go, is composed and performed by Peter Kursov of Pizzanta Music. You'll find more from him by searching for Pizzanta Music wherever you get your tunes. All this music is streaming courtesy of Night Harvest Recordings. That's our Ghost Story Guys house label. And if you want to listen to any of the music here on the show, there are soundtracks for both Season 6 and Season 7, streaming on, I got to say it again, streaming platforms everywhere. All right, I guess that's going to do it.
We'll be back next week, but until then,
Into the darkness we go.
I've always been fascinated with the weirdness of nature. It's amazing.
That's why you're on this call with me.
A very famous meme a few years ago. There was a cartoon section from a Captain America edition where he throws his shield at the Red Skull and it hits him on the head, and the sound that was drawn said "wank."
Written by the famous artist Stavro Jerkimov.
And penciled by Amanda Hugginkiss.
They are.
My screen's froze. Hang on.
Amanda Hugginkiss.
Clever, that dog.
I was going to say, I was imagining one of the cats. Like, what's going on here? That's bullshit.
To the redwoods. To the redwoods. You'll be like, what? I can't believe he's not. He looks in such peak physical fitness.
Right. Another guy who looks like me and claims to be a super soldier.
Yeah.
If there's a tequila cult somewhere, I'm fine. Mezcal cult, sign me up. But
I pray at the Church of Jack.
Oh, God, I'd rather than take my dick. Oof, Jack Daniels. Nope, just chop it off. Welcome back. Am I recording? Yes, I am.